Call to order, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers meeting, September 13th, 2018. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board? I see no one. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rodness, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the
Question.
Yes, James.
President White, board members, just a note that in front of you, you should have a red line version of Resolution 18094 that Renee's provided for you. She'll cover that when she tackles that action item, but I just want to make sure everybody knew.
Thank you. Sounds great. On the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of the August 23rd board meeting and 4 resolutions. 18088, which is authorization to solicit proposals for audit services. 18089, which is authorization to execute contracts for professional services for accounting. 18090, which is authorization to release administration of WACA for the portion of Shorewood outside of the district boundary. And 18091, which is authorization to accept funding and execute an agreement with the Minnesota DNR for improved flood risk mapping. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Manager Olson, seconded by Manager Shackleton. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? President's report. I actually had some meetings last week. On Wednesday and Friday, I had the great joy of exchanging field trips with Peter Reckelbacher. He came over and saw our vegetative buffer, which he hadn't seen because it was new. And on Friday, I went over to his place and saw his wonderful 35-acre prairie and wetland restoration. So I'm going to go back and see it in the spring. Wanted to get kind of a before and after. Wonderful project. On Wednesday, James Whisker and I attended the meeting he had mentioned with Hopkins Mayor and City Manager. There'll be a follow-up with staff. Will you be talking about that in any detail?
I don't think so.
Okay, there'll be a follow-up meeting. And then I also went to the community engagement process on Friday at Cottageville for 325 Lake Road. Good turnout. They had most of their council there, our staff and consultants, city staff, lots of members of the public. So it was a good event, I would say. That is my report, and let's turn to Manager Loftus for operations and programs.
Thank you, President White. We met this evening, and all of our managers were there as well. We did have a discussion about accounts payable, payroll, reporting, and internal controls. And those items will come back at future committee meetings. We also just had a brief update on the IT plan, and I believe their recommendation is to appoint 2 board liaisons to an internal technology committee, and those would be Manager Shackleton and Manager Olson. The administrator, do you want a motion on that or some sort of
To the president appoints subject
Oh,
to.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, with approval of the board.
Okay.
So we can, let me do that right now. If there's a motion, I would be happy to appoint Manager Shackleton and Olson as liaisons to the IT process.
So moved.
Manager Miller, and second by
Second.
Manager Rodness. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, go ahead.
That is all I had to report. Thank you for
All
that
right.
appointment.
Manager Shackleton, the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting report.
The CAC had a great time last night. We took our staff took one of our rules and sent it out in advance to the CAC and asked them to provide an interpretation and feedback at the meeting, and they dove in and identified issues that they didn't understand, like given an education as to why linguistic choices were made and for whose benefit, but they also identified, they poked questions that are about, or they delved into how our processes operate in conjunction with the rules, and it was a real education for them, and they clearly were enjoying the conversation. We went half an hour beyond our allotted time. And our staff were clear that the information that they gleaned from the conversation and the questions would be used for a further refinement of the permitting department's processes. And we always talk about how do we engage the CAC in a way that is valuable to us, but also is valuable to our volunteers. Last night was an example, for the first time in a very long time, where I've seen the CAC engage in a way where it was mutually beneficial and was a valuable use of their time as well as our staff time. And
It's so nice to hear.
yeah, it was really fun to see. It was rewarding to see. It was exhausting to be here that late, but.
Well, thank you for that great report. Are there other meetings or events managers have attended they'd like to comment on, report on? I see no hands. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed in the agenda, including, yes, Manager Olson?
I just want to make a comment that our staff presented in force at the Wasserman Lick Association meeting and informed the political candidates that were assembled there, plus the association members, plus the city management people and everybody else who wanted to get an update on where we stand. And they got applause every time they finished speaking. The resounding positive enthusiasm of the citizenry was incredible. So I just wanted to say they did a great job.
Wonderful, thank you. The Citizens Advisory Committee meeting next month will be on October 10th, and Manager Rognus is the appointed attendee. We are moving on to item 11.2, which is Resolution 18092, authorization to execute the refinance of 325 Lake Road. Mr. Whisker.
President White, managers, before I jump in and provide an overview, I want to invite the Watershed District's Bond Counsel, Steve Rothschild, and District Financial Advisor, Mark LeMay, to join us up front. I'm going to be calling on them to provide a few opinions through the presentation here.
Welcome and thank you for attending.
I think we can keep things relatively short and to the point. Resolution 18092 that's in your packet is a resolution authorizing the proposed issuance of $8 million general obligation conservation program note for this year. It would exchange or replace the district's outstanding conservation program note from 2013, which was the year in which we refinanced the note for the 325 Blake Road property. I'm not going to go into too much background on the purpose of the project. That's pretty well summarized in the packet. As the board knows, 325 Blake Road is a cornerstone linking piece and the Minnehaha Creek Greenway for our management of 270 acres of regional stormwater and this 4-acre connecting piece of Cottageville Park and all of our downstream work. And that's the purpose for the conservation note. It provides the short-term financing we need to move that project forward. We've been working over the last couple of years through a budgeting process to look at different plans for refinance that's been informed by the timing of the physical improvements on the site that are underway right now. Demolition is active. The first corner of the site's been demolished this week for people that are going past. Also informed by timing for the prospective sale of the property and the Watershed District's desire to maintain a level of financial flexibility so that we can implement the strategic water resource initiatives on this site, but also balance those against our financial needs for other capital improvements within our watershed plan across the district. So this is something that we've discussed more recently a number of times in committee, where we framed a variety of options for the replacement note, and included in your packet is a summary of the planned payment scheduled for October 2018, and then a summary of the terms for the financing of this $8 million, which gives us a fixed rate somewhere in the range of 3.65% that will be determined at the time of the bond sale, over a 5-year term with a make-whole provision, and that's something that the board's had a fair amount of discussion on to date. So also included in the packet is obviously the authorizing resolution. It's in draft form. It needs to be fleshed out, and with the dates and signatures included in there following board authorization. There's a counsel opinion from our bond attorney, Mr. Rochel from Kutek Rock. We have a financial advisor's opinion from Springstead, and Mark LeMay is here to talk about that tonight. And then there is an opinion from Mr. Smith, the general counsel, Smith Partners, that identifies how this comports with the Watershed District's management plan, our watershed plan. There's also a schedule of events for next steps. So I think everything's adequately summarized in there. It invited Mr. Rochel, Mr. LeMay, and Mr. Smith to speak tonight briefly on the respective opinions that are included in the packet and see if there's any questions for you. So I think maybe in some semblance of order, we'll tackle Mr. Rochel first, Mr. LeMay, and then Mr. Smith.
Right. My name is Steve Brassel with Kutek Rock Law Firm. My job was simply to implement, prepare the documents to implement the terms of the refinancing that was negotiated with Wells Fargo Bank. And so what you have before you is a resolution that simply implements those terms that includes the various covenants that the bank has requested. And the bottom line is that it's a general obligation of the district payable from taxes to be levied in connection with the conservation program. One of the provisions I think you're aware of, it can be prepaid at any time with possibly a premium depending on market conditions at the time. The resolution basically authorizes the president and administrator to sign the note and any other certificates that may be requested by the bank. We provide our opinion basically to the bank investor to the effect that this is a valid and binding obligation in the district and some other aspects of what they've requested. I think that if there are any questions, happy to answer.
Other questions, Mr. Rosso? Thank you. We'll move on.
My name is Mark LeMay with Springstead. I've been involved with the district back in 2011 when the first note was crafted for this, and then when it was revised in 2013. We knew that this was going to come to a head because of the balloon payment due on October 1 of $10 million. And that was something that we knew we had to refinance, or you'd have to come up with the cash, and refinancing was the better option. The reason we stayed with this structure is because it has certain benefits over a bond deal that apply to your situation. First of all, the district doesn't issue its own bonds. You have a coattail bond arrangement with Hennepin County, so you get to use their AAA rating, and you can bond through them as part of their periodic issuances, and you're working on the same structure with Carver County at this time. But the difference between a bond issuance and this type of an arrangement is that you're dealing with a bank. It's short-term, it's a relatively small amount, and it provides you a lot more flexibility. As was just noted, you get to call these at any time. If you issued bonds, there would most likely be some kind of call protection that bondholders would require, and that's typically at least 8 years and more typically 10 years. So with this, when you want to get out of this deal, you can. There's been some additional flexibility built in. You can call bonds, you can call these notes in $50,000 denominations instead of a larger $250,000, which I think was discussed. So if you want to call some bonds, you have more flexibility in the amount you can call at any given time. There is the possibility of a prepayment penalty. If market moves in your favor, there won't be one. It's possible that market could move in the other direction and there would be one, and then you just would have to weigh whether or not it's worth it to you at the time to pay the penalty to call the note. But you have the option to do that, and it gives you that kind of flexibility. We've looked at rates in the taxable market, and we find that these rates are reasonable for this type of a financing. We provided a chart showing what the general market has been. It's From 1993, we have the MMD chart, which is actually tax exempt, general obligation, AAA bonds, so they're the strongest bonds you can get. And the chart that we show on page 3, second page of our memo indicates that rates are generally well below average for the life of that scale. So this is still an attractive time to borrow money. In a rising rate environment, which we seem to be in at this time, it's probably good to do it now instead of waiting for rates to go up even further. So our recommendation, in our opinion, is that this is a reasonable financing for your projected needs.
Thank you.
I'll entertain any questions.
Questions for Mr. Lemay? Mr. Whisker? Mr. Smith?
Madam President, managers, our role is to provide a legal opinion to you and to Wells Fargo Bank that you have the authority under the watershed law to do this underlying project and then make the payments as required by the financial arrangements. So in 2011, when you acquired the cold storage property, we issued an opinion that affirmed that it was then within your land conservation program and within your 2007 plan, and then that you also had authority to levy the taxes to implement your plan to pay for the acquisition of that property. Now we're reaffirming that, but you have a new plan, a new 10-year plan, as you know, and that plan acknowledges the fact of having acquired the cold storage property and identifies your plans for the site, including a capital improvement project there. So we simply affirm that that legally is appropriate in your plan and that you have the authority to proceed to engage in this transaction and meet your financial obligations.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay. Let's start, first of all, by asking if there's a motion to adopt Resolution 18092.
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second? Manager Shackleton. Now, discussion or questions? We're familiar with this, of course. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 18093, authorization to approve the Arden Park Design Contract Amendment. Ms. Clark.
Chair White, Board of Managers, I'm here tonight requesting an amendment to the Arden Park design contract. The board has previously authorized a contract with Interflu for the not-to-exceed amount of $440,265. The contract amendment which has been requested exceeds this amount, so therefore staff is here tonight requesting board authorization. In summary, the original contract for design services for Arden Park was $419,330. The board authorized a not-to-exceed amount with that of $440,250. Staff, under that authorization, has amended the contract once for the amount of $16,000. Tonight, we're requesting a second amendment for the amount of $59,920. which brings the new contract amount to $495,520, exceeding the board authorized amount of $440. I'll review what each of those amendments is for and how those costs break out between agencies. First, the Amendment 1. The original layout of Arden Park, pretty close to the original after 30%, showed a different alignment of the trails and location of the shelter and swales primarily. With the first contract amendment, we modified the location and orientation of the trail and shelter building near the creek. That contract, First Amendment, also authorized additional geotechnical investigation work for the project, and then expanded the landscape architecture design for the project, which was additional work not anticipated at concept phase when the contract was written and executed, due to the expansion and expression of the stormwater swales throughout the park. I want you to pay attention on this plan to the area I just highlighted along Minnehaha and the swales along the green space here, which relate to part of Contract Amendment 2. The second contract amendment is for essentially 3 things. Again, modifying the layout, integration of city park work, including electrical, the playground container, and terrace construction into this phase of construction, and then for regulatory work related to cultural and historical resources investigation. The layout modification, which is highlighted in red, moved some of the swale and stormwater volume along Minnehaha Boulevard to maximize green space, moved the location of the playground container and north trail segment to better connect the playground space to the shelter and improve that function. The integration of park work, again, wasn't anticipated at the time of the original contract with the uncertainty of timing of when that work would essentially link up. And it now has linked up with this contract, and the city requested that we put it in this design contract. Third is regulatory. I covered this a bit at the 90 or pre-final design review with the board, that there are some additional regulatory activities requested by the State Historic Preservation Office in terms of historical resources review, archaeology, and then from the Corps of Engineers for architectural history. I would like to note that with respect to the regulatory work, we did hear from the State Historic Preservation Office this week, and based on a resubmittal that I provided documenting previous disturbance in the park, no further investigation is necessary. And we are in the process of submitting a archaeological, architectural historical survey to the Corps of Engineers for their review. It was emailed today, actually, and hard copies will be sent and coordinated with SHPO for a period of the next 30 days. But that report concluded that structures under the National Historic Preservation Act are not eligible for listing.
Were they concerned about, was there a mill in this area, or were they just concerned about the existing structures?
The existing structures on site in the Corps' permit authority, their area of potential effect is not the whole park, it's kind of the creek corridor.
Yeah.
And the bridge, existing shelter, and dam or weir structure that's in there are all of age to be eligible for the historic register.
Thank you.
The design contract summary was provided in your packet, and the total for the amendment as it's shared between the city and the district is split $16,210 to the district and $43,710 to the city. The last 2 lines of the work there for architectural history survey and archaeology will likely not be needed of this contract. The other design amendment 1 was shared 50-50 between the district and the city. So the request for board action tonight is to amend the board not to exceed amount and thereby the total contract amount to $495,250. And then I'll note that this action is conditioned upon city concurrence at their council meeting where they're considering 90% design authorization on September 20th.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18093?
So moved.
Manager Rogers, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker. Any questions or comments for Ms. Clark? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Resolution 18094 is approval of the Chanhassen Local Water Management Plan, and we have a red-lined resolution form in front of us. Supersedes what's in the packet.
Chair White, managers. Chair, thank you for acknowledging the red line version. And I'll note that on the advice of council, the actions by the city to adopt new ordinances is required by statute to be within 180 days, not 1 year. And the other red line is for clarification as suggested by council. Board of Managers, we've got 2 local water management plans tonight, and if it's your pleasure, I would prefer to give one overview for an introduction to both, ask for board action on Chanhassen, the item before you, and then forego the second introduction to the Shorewood plan as they relate and happen to be neighboring cities in the same precinct watersheds.
Sounds good.
Okay. So before you tonight, immediately before you is the City of Chanhassen Local Water Management Plan. I'll give a more brief review of the Local Water Management Plan review framework and process, and then provide a summary of the City of Chanhassen's Local Water Management Plan. First, the Local Water Management Plan framework and process. I'll review briefly the management plan framework, the role of the local water plan, and then the LGU requirements that staff is reviewing for in our review of these local plans. First, the plan framework. The Watershed District has approval over local water management plans by statute. Those plans must conform to the district's plan and Minnesota statutes and rules. The water plans are a required part of city's comprehensive plans. The district has review authority over those comprehensive plans, which are all due to Met Council this year in 2018. The local water management plan is one of the primary tools by the district to influence the integrated land use and policy approach through the required coordination plans. And I'll note that those are a separate document that are provided in your packet and adopted by resolution with the local water plans. Historically, as you know, the local water management plan has been quite a technical review, focused on load reductions and meeting TMDLs. With the district's 2018 plan, we've really emphasized the Watershed District as a regional land use planning agency, water planning agency, and presented processes and opportunities for partnership and leveraging district resources and in some cases funding to improve water resources. The requirements of the local water management plan are a list of technical things, maps, data about how water works, land use inventories, locations of city-owned land, and land use projections similar to what's provided in city's comprehensive plans, water resource-related agreements where they exist, and then a capital improvement plan that's 10 years out. As part of the Watershed District Plan, we're requesting that cities explain to us their land use planning processes, plans that they know of to date, and describe how development regulation can be used to leverage integrated land use and water planning and water resource improvements. So those are some additional things that we ask the cities to explore with their local water plan. Within those plans, the cities are also asked to specify whether the district will be implementing its water resource regulations and the Wetland Conservation Act in those cities, or whether cities will choose to implement those regulations themselves. And then finally, the coordination plan. The City of Chanhassen and the upcoming action for the City of Shorewood are coincidentally on the agenda tonight and both located in the same 3 sub-watersheds. So I'll provide a watershed and sub-watershed orientation of both those communities for you before I provide the City of Chanhassen local water management plan summary. First, the 2 cities are both part of the Lake Minnetonka sub-watershed, the Lake Virginia subwatershed, and the Christmas Lake subwatershed. In the Lake Minnetonka subwatershed, there are 5 impaired bays, including Halsteads, Jennings, Stubbs, West Arm, and Forest. Shorewood and Chanhassen do not drain to these impaired water bodies. They drain to the west upper lake, as indicated by the purple drainage arrows on the subwatershed map. In the Christmas Lake subwatershed, it's more clear where the city boundaries are. The red line indicates the separation of Shorewood and Chanhassen. In the Christmas Lake subwatershed, you'll see just a bit of the southern lobe of Christmas Lake is in Chanhassen. And again, the purple arrows indicate direction of flow in that subwatershed. The Lake Virginia subwatershed includes Shorewood, north of the red line across the top of Lake Minnewaska. It includes Chanhassen, the Lake Minnewaska area to the right or east of the red line, and then a part of Victoria on the, that actually includes Lake Virginia to the west of the red line. The Watershed District Management Plan for these 3 subwatersheds generally identifies the same issues and management strategies for these drainage areas. Issues being excess nutrients, localized flooding, and then protecting water quality, wetlands, and terrestrial corridors. Management strategies generally were identified as stormwater management, stream restoration, and wetland and riparian corridor restoration. Our resource implementation priorities for these 3 subwatersheds are protection through regulation, early coordination and integration with land use planning, opportunity-driven stormwater management practices, and then education and capacity building for lake associations. Now the specifics of the Chanhassen Local Water Management Plan. I'll review the major water bodies, water resource issues and management strategies, and then the coordination plan. This highlights in red the City of Chanhassen within the Upper Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. This is a map of Chanhassen, which is about 23 square miles. The area highlighted in blue is Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. And the area, the blob circled in red, is Lake Minnewaska, and that's that little lobe of Christmas Lake. The other subwatersheds are in pink, the Carver WMO, in tan, Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek, and in green, the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District. In the City of Chanhassen, the district is about 5.3 square miles. The capital improvement plan for Chanhassen has 2 things regarding the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District drainage area. One is Christmas Lake stormwater volume and load reduction flagged for 2017. And then the other is a Lake Virginia stormwater volume and load reduction, which includes Lake St. Joe and Minnewaska feasibility study for 2019 to, and that should be 2026 was the time frame. And the district is listed as one of the potential funding partners within their CIP for these 2 items. For Christmas Lake, consistent in both the district and city plans, there's a drainage channel from Chanhassen that flows into that north lobe of Christmas Lake, which has erosion issues identified as something that may need addressing in the future. The coordination plan is provided in your packet. It highlights an annual meeting, regulatory coordination, and notice of land use applications. In the city of Chanhassen, what's unique to this approval tonight is the city will continue to assume regulatory authority for floodplain, wetland protection, erosion control, and stormwater management, while the district will continue to implement illicit discharge, dredging, shoreline and stream bank stabilization, and water body crossings and structures. The city's ordinances are currently not as restrictive as current watershed district rules since our rules were last adopted. The city provided a timeline of 6 months and a plan to update those rules. They also provided a matrix of the rules across all 4 watershed management organizations in the city and plans to adopt the most restrictive ordinances across those 4 organizations, of which Riley Purgatory in almost all cases is more restrictive. So at the end, those rules will be more restrictive than the districts. So the approval tonight also notes that shall this action not occur, the district will assume regulatory authority after 180 days. I'd just like to note the current working relationship at a staff level is that through an administrative process with a letter our council helped draft a template for, the city does send the district permit applications for work that falls under our rules within their city, and with a letter requesting us to regulate those applications. I know there has been one recent small subdivision, so there's not a lot of regulatory activity, but that's the informal arrangement with staff at the current time. So with that, I request approval of the Chanhassen Water Management Plan.
So moved.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Shackleton? Any questions? Manager Olson?
Can we assume that this, I'm not going to assume anything, I'm just going to ask the question. Erosion control, floodplain alteration, wetland protection, and stormwater management in Shorewood is still under our
Yes,
management?
yes,
Okay, so this is why the extra verbiage is in here, because they're
Yes.
trying to do that and they're trying to adopt new
yes.
standards. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, on to Shorewood.
Managers, before you is the request for approval for the Shorewood Local Water Management Plan, Resolution 18-095. Within the Minnehaha Creek Upper Watershed District, Shorewood is highlighted in red, just above Chanhassen. The major, Shorewood's about 13 square miles with a small portion highlighted in red just east of Christmas Lake. That's in Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek. Otherwise, the rest is in Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. The major water bodies include Lake Minnetonka, as you see, and then the northern portion of Christmas Lake. The plan, summary, and partnership opportunities. The current partnership, which the board may recall, we recently approved the beginning of 2018, I recall, was highlighted as a primary coordination effort between Minnehaha Creek and the city of Shorewood, and then regulatory coordination, early regulatory coordination was also highlighted as an opportunity with Shorewood. The coordination plan provided in your packet provides for an annual meeting, early coordination and notice of land use applications, and then again, regulatory coordination. The city of Shorewood will be asking us to continue to implement our water resources regulations and including the Wetland Conservation Act within the city of Shorewood. And just as an update on those current coordination efforts, on the Western Shorewood planning, staff has worked with the city to evaluate past feasibility studies and alternatives for several different options to resolve these series of flooding issues. And a primary component of basically solving all of them is a regional stormwater facility on property the city doesn't own. The city is currently coming up with a plan for acquisition of that property, and will keep us apprised of the status of that. Staff provided a very robust regulatory analysis of the phasing approach and the different subcomponents of a proposed plan to address all those issues. So that's the status of our help and coordination. And our next meeting will probably be a concept plan meeting for implementation of one or more of the phases of the suggested actions. So with that, the staff is recommending approval of the Shorewood Local Water Management Plan.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller? Did you have a question, Manager Olson?
Oh.
Okay. Anybody else?
I did have one
Oh,
curiosity
you had a questioning look in your face.
Yeah, I was surprised to see Gale Island as part of Shorewood. I don't know why I didn't know that, but how do they get the utilities out there? Are they coming from Big Island or are they coming from Shorewood?
Good question, and I don't know the answer.
Okay, then, all right, I won't worry about it.
I was also surprised by the city boundary.
You see how it reaches up there? It's, almost looks like a voting poll.
Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Somebody's spending too much time on their boat.
Not enough.
Resolution 18-096 is authorization to accept petition to impound judicial ditch 2 and 6 Mile. We have Anna Brown. Manager Olson, did you know that Gale Island was originally purchased for $2.50? It's true. I know this.
And I wish I had 2 shares of original Coca-Cola.
Oh, there you go. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. So I am seeking tonight approval and acceptance of the petition to impound Judicial Ditch 2 or 6 Mile Creek, as well as asking the board to direct WANC to prepare a hydrologic report for that impoundment. As you know, the district is advancing design on 3 of the 4 barriers proposed as part of the 6 Mile Creek Halstead Bay Habitat Restoration Program. And we will cover that barrier design with a little bit more detail as a discussion item under 12.1. One of the barriers as part of this program is located between Mud Lake and Halstead Bay. This barrier is sort of a highway of carp, if you will, coming out of Halstead Bay. There's 60,000 carp in Halstead Bay that move pretty freely through 6 Mile Creek and populate Mud Lake and Parley Lake within this system. So this barrier is a really critical piece of infrastructure to sort of isolate the whole 6 Mile system from that source of carp in Halstead Bay to better be able to manage those fish. At this location as well, 6 Mile Creek is a judicial ditch, meaning that it's a ditch located between, or that crosses between 2 counties. And the district has been the drainage authority for that ditch since 1972. This is a map highlighting all the ditches for which the district is currently the ditch authority. The authority for these drainage ditches falls under Minnesota Statute 103E, and in proposing to place a structure or impoundment in the ditch at this location, the district is triggering a process outlined in 103E.227, which details the process for impounding, rerouting, or diverting drainage systems waters. So the process is outlined on this slide here. Essentially, the process is that a petition is filed with the drainage authority, which includes the location of the installation as well as the concept plans. If the petition meets those statutory requirements, the drainage authority will accept it and direct an engineer to prepare a hydrologic report regarding the proposed structure. After the engineer then files that report back with the ditch authority, notice is given for a public hearing for that impoundment. And then finally, the drainage authority will evaluate that engineering report, the feedback, and determine whether the proposal is of public benefit and whether it will, and determines that it will not impair the utility of that drainage authority before authorizing the project. So in this case, the district is both the petitioner and petitionee. So the sort of first step in this whole process is that the district files a petition with itself, then triggering the remainder of that project. So the actions that I'm seeking tonight are first that the board approve the petition that was included in your packet, basically accept that it wants to petition itself. Then they will accept the petition as the drainage authority, and finally direct Wank Associates to prepare that hydrologic report. The other two steps, so receiving the report and holding the public meeting, and then finally authorizing the work, will be done over a series of 2 subsequent meetings in the coming weeks. One quick note, there was a really small change to the petition. It listed Minnetrista as being in Harbor County when it's in fact in Hennepin County, so I have a clean copy for execution here with me tonight.
Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Olson, Manager Shackleton, any questions for Ms. Brown? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Resolution 18097 is adoption of the 2019 budget and work plans and announcement of a December 13th public meeting. Mr. Whisker.
President White, managers, for your consideration tonight, I've incorporated in the same packet 2 resolutions. 18097, as President White just outlined, is for adoption of the 2019 budget and 2019 work plans, and then Resolution 18098 is for certification of the 2019 tax levy. As a separate matter, we'd ask that President White announce the December 13th, 2018 public meeting that is required under the Truth in Taxation statute. For a brief background in terms of the budget process, incorporated in your packet, we talked about the budget development process being in the first quarter developing and refining the preliminary budget and revenue projections. In May to July, we spent a good deal of time together talking through the directional priorities and organizational outputs for the district. July to August, we narrowed in on specific budget revenue detail and finalized the CIP. And that brings us to today, where we're looking at adopting the budget, the work plans, and certifying the levy. We've had at least 8 discussions through various forms of committee that are summarized in the packet, which concluded most recently on August 23rd when we held duly noticed public hearing. Since that hearing to today, we've received no public comment. Included in your packet are the actual budget package, which includes a breakdown of the budget levy summary, all the way down into program detail in tabular form. And then we've, of course, got the consolidated work plans that describe the outputs. So we could take these as separate matters, and looking at 18097 first, for the budget and work plans would adopt the budget of $15,116,768. I believe that's structured as a roll call vote.
Correct.
Certainly is. If you would, first may I have a motion to...
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Any comments or questions before we call the vote? I want to say how much I appreciate that the board has been so thoroughly involved in this, and the committee chairs have done such a great job of bringing this forward. And of course, the administrator and all staff who've worked, as the listing of our meetings shows, we've really spent a lot of time and dug into this well. If you would call the roll call, Mr. Smith?
Manager Becker.
Aye.
Manager Shackleton.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Rognus.
Aye.
Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager Olson.
Yes.
President White.
Yay.
7-0.
Now, resolution 18098, which is certification of the levy. May I have a motion?
Move approval.
And is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller and Rognus, any comment or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I could do a roll again.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Please do.
Manager Becker.
Aye.
Manager Shackleton.
Aye.
Manager Miller.
Aye.
Manager Rognus.
Aye.
Manager Loftus.
Aye.
Manager Olson.
Aye.
President White.
Aye.
7-0.
That's good. We have a discussion item at 12.1, which is carp barrier design briefing from Ms. Brown.
Thank you, President White and managers. I am here tonight to provide a briefing on the carp barrier design, which is nearing substantial completion. And this is in advance of coming back to the board at the end of September to seek design approval. As you recall, these barriers are part of the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay Habitat Restoration Program. And beginning in March of this year, we began developing design for 3 of the 4 carp barriers. The carp barrier that we have postponed design for is the one between North Lunston and South Lunston, which will be kicking off in early 2019. This project is being funded through Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, and the board will recall that Lessard Sam's is funding mostly the capital infrastructure in this work, including the barrier installation, the utility installation for aeration units, and the removal contracts for carp. And the items that are considered district match are the removal and monitoring equipment, the aeration units themselves, staff time, as well as design services, which this design process falls under. So I'm going to move into the design briefing and just walk through each barrier. This is some new footage from our most recent removal effort out at Steiger Lake. So this is fresh off the presses. And I will say too, the intent is still that these 3 barriers will be installed this fall. We're working to advance property rights on a parallel track, so things are still in movement, but that's the intent, and that's what we're working towards. The building block of all 3 of these barriers are these structures in front of you, and what you're looking at are 2 pilings with precast grates that are going to be installed in those pilings. So everything below the grates here are going to be driven into the creek bed. There's a precast concrete curb that would lay across the creek bed, both to sort of receive the grates as well as prevent carp from sort of rooting around and provide some stabilization. precast grates will be inserted into those piling structures. And we'll have a pulley system, which is what you can see sort of sticking out here. That can be, it's a removable pulley system, but we can deploy them to raise and lower the gates to allow for fish passage, as well as allow for some debris management.
What kind of sedimentation do you expect on that?
Sorry, can you repeat the
What kind
question?
of sedimentation do you expect? Or is that the debris management piece?
So Manager Shackleton, I don't know that we expect debris from this per se. It'd be more sort of vegetation moving through the channel. And then we're also going to be taking measures to sort of reinforce the base of that barrier to make sure that carp aren't able to root around. But I don't expect sedimentation to be an issue. So now I'm going to walk through each barrier. So this is the cross section at Crown College. And you can see the precast structures there in the middle. And then the area extending from the piling out to the, this will be the creek bed. This is just a galvanized steel fencing. So the Crown College barrier will be located on campus right off of a service road that gets them out to the baseball diamond. And you can see here, laser pointer, there we go. So this is the underlying photo isn't that great here, but this is how the barrier will cross the creek bed here. So these three yellow dots are where you'll have pilings, and then the precast grates will be between the pilings, and then you'll have that fencing running from the piling out to the creek bed. And the fencing will be buried so that they can't dig under. Wasserman is a very similar design. Right now we're proposing to only use those precast grates, although we might modify the design between now and seeking approval to utilize some of that fencing as well. But otherwise it's very similar. And the Wasserman barrier is proposed to be located at the outlet of Wasserman Lake on a property that's owned by this church right here. And again, very similar design, 2 pilings connected with those precast grates. And saved this one for last because it's the biggest, but again, it's the same basic structure, the 6 Mile Marsh barrier. The change is really just in the number of pilings as well as the depth of those precast grates, rather than having a single 4-foot depth grate. We'll have 2 3-foot grates stacked. We are working with Wenck right now to evaluate whether we can modify this design slightly for cost savings and extend the use of the fencing so that we should be able to reduce the number of pilings and therefore the cost. We really only need a couple of sections to be able to achieve that fish passage goal. And for the rest of it, there's no reason that it couldn't be it couldn't be just sort of permanent fencing. And the board's aware we've proposed to place barriers on either side of Highland Road. And again, this is one where the land rights are somewhat complicated, so we're also looking at whether there's an alternative design that would allow for one-sided barrier and then looking at another sort of trapping mechanism that could siphon the fish into that barrier, but not have a full build out of a permanent structure. And I'm pausing for questions. So.
Manager Olson.
Okay, you said the barrier going out of Wasserman is between the church and Westinghouse? Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Is there going to be signage And I'm just envisioning that we're gonna have like something, a crossing of something blocking the creek in an accessible place. And
Andrew Shackleton, we are certainly planning on winter signage. That's something that's been sort of top of mind from a safety perspective, but I think I'll take that as a recommendation and a good idea that we also put some signage around just to inform folks walking by what we're doing and why. We have started to plan some signage around the fish removal for a similar purpose, so that if folks are walking by and see something going on, they know to at least link back to our website and see the project context. So I think we'll incorporate that recommendation.
Andrew Olson.
Is there anything that prevents the gates from being opened by a vandal?
Manager Olson, I think they will be quite difficult to remove without the pulley system. So the pulley system isn't permanently affixed. It's something
That's
that you
my
can
question.
deploy.
Thank you.
And then I think that the grates will be between 75 and 100 pounds, so you'll want that pulley system.
And how do we drive those I-beams into the ground? Is that
I
a,
might ask our engineer over here to answer that.
As part of this, they'll have a piling, the contractor will come out and actually drive the piles out in each of those spots. So that you have, you can see the piling machines they drive as they drive it down.
do they put a raft out? What do they do to reach that spot?
They'll probably have a crane or a mechanism that then will drive it out.
Oh, from solid ground reaching out. Thank you.
Andrew Shackleton?
just one other question about at 6 Mile, you're talking about reducing cost based on pile driving. And we're suggesting that it might be worthwhile to just have a permanent fence, except for one section. And earlier you mentioned debris management.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a sense for, given high flows in larger rain events, what kind of debris might go down something like 6 Mile, which in my mind is a larger order stream than the other two. And I could see value with having gates that you can remove to deal with debris.
Manager Shackleton, I think it's a good point. I think we don't know exactly how much debris will accumulate. That'll be sort of a learning process, but when the creek is flowing, we'll have our staff out regularly inspecting, and we'll also work with the city to see if they can participate in some level of the debris management where they might have a vehicle that could facilitate something. The gates are probably only useful from a debris management perspective in sort of extenuating circumstances. Eric Fieldseth had mentioned today if there were a bog that we were trying to get through or something, if that could be facilitated with the gates. But for the most part, we envision having these down and keeping them down and deploying them more regularly from a fish passage or critter passage standpoint than actually for the debris management. But the other thing that we had talked about as well is developing the fencing in such a way that if we realized in 2 years that we really benefit from having the grates that you can raise and lower, you could basically roll back part of the fence and put more pilings in and expand the grate. So much of this cart barrier work is still in flux and everyone's learning, so there's a lot of opportunity to just kind of look at this incrementally and sort of figure out what works now and be able to be responsive to science as it develops.
What are the orders of magnitude of costs that for pile driving? If it's a cost savings.
The estimate that we got for the pilings is that it's about $4,000 for each piling, and then it's another $4,000 for deployment. So it's significant. Particularly we are trying to work within the budget proposed in the Lessard Sams grant, and it at this point would drive us above that. So.
Mr. Meehan?
So, Manager Shackleton, managers, as part of looking at the gates too, we're looking at the velocities in the cross section. So we're trying to optimize that balance of where debris would start to focus within the channel versus where it won't, so that we can minimize the number of pilings that we have, but then ensure that we still have the ability to, where's the debris typically going to show and provide an issue. So.
I could just see chain link fence or steel fences not being as structurally sound as these gates.
And that's why we're looking to optimize where the
Let's just do it right.
Anything else? I have a Gary Larson cartoon in my head with the cart piling up against the barrier, not turning around. I know that's not true. Are
We
there
do
any
have
other
the
questions?
electroshockers for that case.
Anything else for Ms. Brown? Thanks very much.
They squeeze through the gates. Now they look more like Homo Homo Nuku Nuku Apua.
We always enjoy the carp discussions.
There's been a lot of just send Boy Scouts out there. They're effective as barriers.
Oh, yes, good press. I'm sorry?
I just told Bill we should send Boy Scouts out
Oh,
there. They're
yeah,
an
right.
effective barrier.
We'll move to item 12.2, which is redevelopment and sale of 225 Lake Road property, and look to Mr. Heyman, who has stepped out for just a moment. I believe I saw it. Yeah.
There he is. You're up.
Closed.
I'm sorry. Mr. President.
At your pleasure, I can handle the administrator's report before or after, but Lewis and I were just conferring about making sure that we appropriately read into the record the closed session, so
Are we going to begin the closed session at the beginning of the presentation?
it might go.
Okay, all right. Let's do the administrator's report. Sorry, Mr. Heyman.
Very good. The one day that I wasn't going to be surprised about it moving around. So a couple of updates. Tiffany wanted me to let the board know that there was a meeting with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board's Citizens Advisory Committee for the Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail Master Plan. It's kind of a mouthful. And the Watershed District, Park Board, and City of Minneapolis staff, along with the consultant team from Hoisington, Kogler, Wenck, Interflu, provided a comprehensive interview to the citizens group of the ecological conditions, stormwater issues and potential solutions, and historical conditions of the creek. And the feedback she wanted me to provide is one, we had the meeting, which I think everybody knew about, but also at the conclusion of the presentation, she said it's been a long time since she's been at a meeting in that kind of situation where she's received so much public compliment, which was good. It was a widely attended meeting, and there was what she said is an extraordinary amount of complimentary comments on all three agencies for the successful collaboration, just seeing the park board, the district, and the city all working together on the corridor in a way that integrates all these different functions, they said was a great example of their tax dollars at work, so that's good feedback there. Also from Tiffany, the ongoing effort to kind of keep everybody informed on water level updates. We started out pretty wet this year. It's been very dry. The last 8 weeks has been very dry. We've had lower water levels across the district. So Nokomis, which is something that everybody's tracking, is below the outlet in Weir. It was last time I reported. We're at 814.84, which is about 3 inches below run-out elevation. So water can't leave the lake because it's actually below the bottom run-out Weir. Minnetonka is at 928.7. So discharge is very low coming out of the dam. It's at 12 cubic feet per second, which is required anytime the lake level falls below 928. And we'll see what happens because we've got rain in the forecast next week. So we have storage and nobody's flooding right now. We also, regarding some of the water level concerns and the coordination in South Minneapolis, we did have a meeting, Tiffany and myself, along with Michael Schroeder from the Park Board, and Katrina Kessler from the city, with Mayor Frey's senior strategic policy advisor, Peter Ebnett, over in the Minneapolis Mayor's office, just to talk about what's happening around Nokomis and how the three agencies are coordinating and working on that together. It's a productive meeting. I think we shared a lot of information, and there's no follow-up required. President White mentioned the open house for Cottageville Park. I think that was, from what I heard, a really successful event. We had about 50 people there. I think a lot of engagement. A lot of the council members were there, and it sounded like that really turned out well. I think that's a lot of credit to not just Mike, but also Kim LeBeau in our office, coordinating with the city and LHB on the community engagement strategy for 325 Blake Road. Other coverage that we've had in the media, I think Anna and Telly have been working full tilt on media coverage for 6 Mile, and we've given an update at a previous meeting about the level of coverage we're getting, but fantastic coverage of the cart management over at Steiger. We had Minnesota Public Radio ran a 4-minute story. All 4 stations provided coverage, and then there was a big article in the Strib. So there's just a lot of attention to that project, which is great for us and our partners in that region, as well as Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. On Master Water Stewards, as you know, we're kind of in recruitment mode, and asked by Education Communications staff to let the board know it's still open applications. We've received 15 so far, so if you know someone that's interested in applying, please get the message out. And then my last note is I've provided a copy of my presentation as well as a policy write-up from APA. The board had asked for feedback and copies of presentations that we're giving. Attended and presented an excellent conference in Kansas City that was hosted by the National American Planning Association. Conference is called Water Planning Connect. And the board might recall back in 2016, we distributed a policy from the APA that they had published calling nationally for the integration of land use and water planning, and really calling for planners to reach out and connect with technical water managers and integrate water as a discipline within the sort of regional and community planning sphere, looking at drinking water supply, wastewater, and sort of natural water management systems. And when we distribute that policy, one of the notes that we had is the language that the APA used mirrored almost verbatim the policy that this board drafted with the help of Lewis 2 years prior in 2014. And it was that policy paper in 15 that went up to the National APA Board of Directors, and they had a discussion about what efforts could they take to actually bring these 2 disciplines together. And so this conference was the first effort that they've taken since adopting that policy. It was a pilot or experimental conference where they were recruiting water management professionals from around the country, as well as planning professionals, and sharing those disciplines. And so it was a great vehicle for us to get our message out. We presented in a regional planning session with the executive director of the Cape Cod Commission, and we stepped them through, as you'll see in the presentation, the unique powers and authorities that we have under Minnesota watershed law, which everybody was intrigued and excited by and wanted to learn more, and Minnehaha Creek Watershed District's experience over the generations operating under watershed law, and our own findings about the governance gap between land use and water management, and our reaching the same conclusion they did 2 years earlier, but from a different perspective. And that by identifying that and positioning water as more of an asset for the built environment, we were able to work successfully with hospitals and malls and parks and businesses and cold storage facilities. And we'd accomplished this great stuff in the Greenway, and we were carrying that forward through our 2017 watershed plan and carrying it forward into the 6 Mile geography. And we just got tremendous feedback. It was a great networking opportunity. People are really impressed by the work this board's doing. So that's my report on the APA conference, and that's all I have, unless there's questions.
Mr. Mandrosa.
Can you comment on the Feline letter?
I don't know that I want to do that at the moment because I haven't fully digested Mr. Faline's email. It's on the top of my list of things to do tomorrow. The comment that I'd provide is most of the questions that I could discern from the email have been asked and answered multiple times, multiple ways by multiple agencies in multiple formats, sometimes all together, sometimes individually, and that's probably going to be the nature of my response. He's met multiple times with the watershed district, the district engineer, the district administrator. He's met with leadership over at the city. He meets on a pretty recurring basis with the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, and those questions have been asked and answered. So that's the extent of my comment at this point, not having sort of fully waded through it and framed how we're going to follow up.
Yeah.
Manager Miller.
He's not available right now to respond to our response because he's at his home in Hawaii. He wasn't able to come to a reunion for the city council on Friday because he's at his annual vacation at his residence in Hawaii. So I don't want to ruin his reputation as a socialist, but he's living a good life.
Thank you for that insight. Are there any other comments or questions for Mr. Whisker? Thank you. And thank you for waiting. And we'll go on to item 12.2, and may I have a motion for the board to convene in closed session to discuss the value of the property for sale?
So moved.
I'm going to give it to Shackleton and second to Manager Rognus. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Madam President, just for the record, we're discussing 325 Lake Road topics.
Thank you.